Hello, this is Dr. Earl with Denali Medical. To get us started, I'd like to ask you a question. Are you ready? I mean, really ready. Are you ready to find solutions? Are you ready to find root source healing? If you are, well, let's go.
So COVID has been very interesting. The early projections were that there would be millions and millions of deaths, both in the United States and globally. And I guess the puzzling part for me was where a lot of those projections came from, because COVID-19 is a coronavirus, and there are 7 other coronaviruses that have infected us as men, as human beings. As human beings, and then there's other viruses that affect coronaviruses that affect. Obviously, they talked about bats and dogs and so forth, and these other coronaviruses infect other species. But given the fact that we have a track record of 7 other, with this being the 8th, coronaviruses, you would think that since the other 7 followed a very similar pattern, that we would expect something similar from this coronavirus. And so the projections when they first came out really didn't mimic what we saw for projections and then reality for SARS and for MERS, 2 of the most recent coronaviruses that we have a lot of data on. So that was the first issue with the coronavirus, was the fact that the projections were not based on our history with other coronaviruses, didn't seem to be based on some of the things that we'd seen, and we were very overreactive to some of the early data rather than, and we know that early data is always bad data, it always is. And that has also ferreted out to be the case here. We made some very sweeping changes socially, economically, politically, all kinds of different changes that we put into based on these projections, which now, again, in retrospect, it's following a pattern similar to what we've seen out of SARS and MERS. So that initial response was quite frustrating. The other thing is that we talked in a previous text back and forth, Nikki, about something called herd immunity. Herd immunity is really what we hope for with any infection. Herd immunity is where at least 60% and hopefully 80% of the population is immune and resistant to a particular infection. What that means is they've either been exposed to the virus and fought it off, been vaccinated, or other, meaning that, and when I say other, if there are 7 other coronaviruses out there, it makes logical sense that our bodies would have a good chance of recognizing similarities in coronavirus 1, 2, and 6, and just throwing out numbers, and then be able to help us fight off coronavirus 8. And they've actually shown that to be the case, especially when they look at some of these antibodies they're trying to test for, because they're finding that there are patients, and in particular some of the younger patients, 30 and younger, that don't really show any particular antibodies specific for COVID-19, and yet they're immune, meaning they've seen it or they've been exposed to it and they fight it off because of their experience with their immune system's experience with other coronaviruses. So again, when we start looking at testing and antibody testing and some of these other things, the reality is it's very difficult to get accurate data because there are so many variables involved. And so those are some of the big frustrations that they're looking at. So back to herd immunity. When we study epidemiology in medical school, one of the things that they talk about is trying to get the healthy population out exposed and immune, and therefore they overcome the virus, so that they then protect those patients that are less ready or less prepared to fight off the virus, those that are susceptible. The way to think about herd, and then again, one of the other ways to get herd immunity we talked about is vaccination. But for this conversation, I'll talk about mostly getting herd immunity through a natural exposure. The way to think about herd immunity is that it starts to rain, you get a little bit wet, and then you have an umbrella, so you put the umbrella up. That umbrella protects you from getting more rain on you. And this is, again, a very simple analogy, but I'm hoping it brings to bear the point that needs to be made. So what happens is now you have immunity, if you will, or you have protection from the rain because you felt it rain, you put your umbrella up, and now you're protected. Well, we think of an umbrella really just being a protection for one person, but the reality is umbrellas can protect others. And so pretty soon now you've got a group of 10 people, then 20, then hundreds, then thousands, then millions that have been exposed and have their umbrella up. And what this means is that people now who don't have an umbrella, or those who are not necessarily able to fight off the virus, they can actually walk very comfortably under everyone else's umbrella and not be exposed to the rain because the contagiousness is not prevalent. The virus is not prevalent in society because everyone has some level, I shouldn't say everyone, but a majority of people have some level of immunity, some level of protection. And so those people that are most susceptible to it will still be able to walk through the rainstorm and not get wet. And every once in a while, yes, a drop of rain will get through to someone who's susceptible, but that's a reality of life no matter what we do. With influenza, with cancer, with everything, there are drops that get through. We have these protections in place, but there are drops that get through, and then we become sick or susceptible to whatever disease hits us. So herd immunity is really what both sides are striving for, whether it's get us out and let us get exposed, and where you self-isolate those people that are most susceptible, those people go into a self-isolation, not a quarantine. Quarantine is for those that are sick, but they self-isolate until a certain percentage of the population has immunity, and then they're able to, then the susceptible people are able to walk under their umbrella of protection without having high exposure rates. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, that's what I always thought herd immunity was, but I love your explanation. But we had someone that mentioned one time that if you get a vaccination, then that ends up being like a typhoid Mary situation where you're running around because you're developing immunity within your body and you're exposing people as you're developing your own immunity. And I didn't understand that. So that was confusing to me because I always thought herd immunity was as you just explained it. So yes, I know that I heard 25 years ago. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say typhoid Mary and typhoid was a very particular type of vaccination and so forth that wasn't the same vaccinations that we've got now. But anyway, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's what I was wondering because I know 25 years ago or so, thereabouts, you would give a puppy a parvo vaccine and then you'd have to keep it away from any other puppies because he could give the parvo to the other puppies while he's during that initial immunity antibody or antigen production, whatever it was.
Yeah, and that's if they're using live vaccines or some variation of that. But the other reality too is that when someone's developing immunity to a certain disease, the reality is they can be more susceptible to the other disease. The other challenge that they're having with the virus and a vaccination for it is the fact that it's already mutating, meaning now it's getting exposed to other viruses and it's starting to swap DNA and pieces with the other viruses. And so they may come up with a vaccination that works for the brand or version of COVID that is, prevalent here in June, but by the time they come up with it in September, October, now a new version of the virus is prevalent, and the vaccination will miss the mark. That's the unfortunate reality of a lot of times what happens with influenza. They go over to China, try to do some research and predict what is going to emerge from the Asian population into the globe, and sometimes they get it, meaning they get about 60% of protection, and a lot of times they miss it, which at low it's only provided anywhere between 5 and 8% protection. So it's not a. I had an interesting conversation with one of my mathematician friends from high school, and he said, well, if we're waiting for herd immunity, and he put this very simple equation out that just said, okay, this many people exposed, this many people in a population, it's going to take this many years. And I said, okay, you've got to understand the test is only 60% accurate. You've got to understand, and then just put all these variables. And I said, okay, now come up with an equation for me. And he said, yeah, right. Immunity and herd immunity is this really complex matter that if we let our bodies and life kind of sort it out. Again, this is opinion of Dr. Earl, and also, looking at what I understand of epidemiology, if we let the amazing human body and life figure it out, it does a much better job than the science level that we understand right now. We just don't get it to the level that we need to in order to really provide protection.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that really clears that up. We just, we really do miss having you on the show because your ideas or your research is so great. So Wendy just joined us again because we had lost her, and I know she wanted to ask you about the mask wearing. Isn't that right, Wendy?
Yeah, Dr. Earl, I noticed a lot, they don't like to talk about it, but some doctors are now, and the paramedics are talking about it. They've had all these people wearing masks, and not all of them have like my mask has that little ventilator out in front, so it breathes. And so a lot of these people just have the regular mask, and they don't have like a little what they call ventilator. And they said people have been passing out in their cars because they've been driving in with their cars. They've been working out with them. And they said this is causing a lack of oxygen to the brain. It's causing problems because people are passing out and they're going to have brain damage because they've been wearing this mask morning, noon, and night. And it's like I wear one when I had to go into Home Depot yesterday. Yeah, I wore one on, and then it kind of fell off me, and then I had it partially on, and I picked up the product I needed to walk out of the store, no problem. But and I took off the whole thing. But these people have been wearing masks morning, noon, and night, and they haven't got the proper oxygen because they don't have the proper ventilator one. But they said they're starting to have problems with people who didn't get enough oxygen to the brain, and they're starting to have people coming to the doctor's office, and they're just all lightheaded. It's because they've been wearing this mask, and they said that there's no reason to wear this mask.
So mask science is interesting because I find it fascinating, again, the different dialogues, and it depends upon the day. I mean, for a while, the World Health Organization was saying everybody wear masks, and now they're saying masks don't help prevent. And then Dr. I'm going to draw a blank. I want to say Fiochi, but from the United States government. Anyway, he's saying masks, then he says not. I mean, it's just, and you've got all kinds of information out there as far as masks. So
right.
The fascinating part is all of this science was done years ago based on particle size and so forth for emergency medicine physicians. The reason is not that to protect us against viruses, but protect us against chemicals that came in. So you'll have farmers that get doused in certain chemicals that are harmful. And we need to be able to go in and assess what's going on. And so all this data has been compiled for masks. It's out there. We know what masks do and what they don't do. And so when they start talking about a new research and new this, and this data is just out in regards to masks, and masks prevent this and prevent that, it's unfortunate because a lot of it is, again, early data and poor data, and it's not based on a lot of scientific facts. So let's first talk about you wearing a mask, and then we'll talk about someone else wearing a mask and what protection that provides you. First, they've made a big deal about something called an N95 mask. What that means is down to 95 nanoparticles, that mask, or 95 nanometers, that mask will protect you against something that is that small. Well, the virus is actually much smaller than that. And so there's still...
Sorry about that, Doc.
Yeah, there's still a risk for that virus to be able to get in beyond that mask. Now, will it provide some protection? Yes. Will it provide better protection than just a surgical mask? Yes. But if you're looking to really prevent yourself from getting the virus, I've seen patients not patients, but people in full gas masks. And so the masks still allow things to get through. There was one doctor who went on a tirade about the fact that we know that moist, warm environments make it so that the virus lives longer. Well, after you breathe your humidified air through a mask for a period of time, what have you created? A moist, warm environment. And he said it's working just like a net to capture the virus, but then later get into, I think that's a little extreme. And again, that's making science a little too simplistic. But the reality is masks don't necessarily protect you except for one thing. And this is hilarious because, excuse me, you'll see patients that touch all this stuff that's contaminated with everyone else. They'll lift up their mask, they'll scratch their nose or their face, put their mask back down, and that's the wrong thing to do. The one thing masks genuinely and absolutely do is if you touch something or someone who is infected, and now you have viruses on your fingers, it prevents you from transporting that virus to your nose, mouth, or eyes. Well, eyes no, but your nose or mouth on an immediate basis. And at least until you can get your hands washed again, you should be, if you're going to scratch your face or so forth and itch, you should be doing that through the mask, because then the virus doesn't come in direct contact with you. That is the one proven way that these masks, simple masks, can actually protect you. If you are sick and you don't have a really tight fitting mask, the interesting thing is you look at a lot of people when they breathe in and breathe out and the mask goes in and out, what ends up happening is, and people will complain of dry eyes, and that's because a lot of the volume of air works its way around the cracks of the mask at an accelerated velocity, meaning if you're sick, you're actually distributing virus at an accelerated velocity. So it's kind of a put together, not quite sorted out all the way science, and you'll have one person that holds on to this bit of data, everybody wears masks, and another person that says this bit of data, nobody wears masks, and you really have nowhere to go. Masks, again, if you're going to be around a lot of people that are sick and you want to protect yourself, a mask will keep you from touching them and touching your face, as long as you don't remove it just to scratch around your nose or mouth. And that's its biggest advantage. As far as then someone else wearing the mask and protecting you, that data is really quite suspect. because of the things we've talked about. Because when they breathe in or cough or so forth, the reality is the air works its way around the mask and is leaving at a much higher velocity, and so it can spread much further. And the other thing that they've shown with masks is people who are sick will put on a mask thinking they're providing protection to everyone, and do things they should not do, like go out into public and spread the disease even more. So masks are kind of one of those things that's very interesting. If masks work, why are we still social distancing? And if the social distancing works, then why aren't we going back to work?
Right. Hold on, guys. We're going to take a break real quick. We'll give Dr. Earl right back just to give out some information. Hold on. We'll just take a 4 or 5 minute break, or a station break. We'll be right back. This is Granada Forum Natural Health Connections with Nikki and Wendy. Hold on, guys. Dr. Earl.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back. Revolution Radio. You don't see it, do you? How close we are to absolute chaos? The sick ones are sitting on their fat asses, eating and drinking themselves into a stupor, polluting the world without a second thought while it goes down the toilet. Nobody wants to do the nasty work. You know, the shit that we all just think about. Most good citizens are just along for the ride and then bitch and moan and complain about everything when it doesn't work out. Not me. Get it? Revolution Radio, where we do the nasty work. www.freedomslips.com. It is no secret that the so-called mainstream media is best described as controlled propaganda. Countless news stories are either totally ignored or spun with half-truths, and because of this, essential facts and vital information are often compromised. Join Dr. Ott every Friday night on Studio B at 10 p.m. Eastern and learn why the story behind the story was nominated for a Peabody Award in its second year of producing unparalleled broadcasting excellence in 1997. That is, if you really care about learning the truth.
Hey folks, Karl Marx here. You know, from my smash hit, The Communist Manifesto, the little ditty that changed the world. I crack myself up. But really, you know what else? The joke is on you, because this little manifesto has been used on you. Yeah, the United States of America. And then there was my epic, Das Kapital, a sweeping work of intrigue and...
Want to learn more about the Marxist agenda and other important stuff? Listen to The Ultimate Remedy with L.B. Bork, Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on Revolution Radio.
All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Okay, we're back. We're talking with Dr. Earl, and of course, he gives his bioenergy vitamin C at 1-800-674-3250. at 1-800-674-3250, at worldsgreatestvitaminc.com, worldsgreatestvitaminc.com. Dr. Earl, are you still with us?
Yep.
Can you also give out your website so how people get a hold of you?
So the clinic website is denalimed.com. DENALIMED.com. Let me just reiterate, talk about one of the things to do with masks. And
sure.
And so I'm not saying don't wear masks, and I'm not saying do wear masks. What I'm saying is come to, do some thinking, do some research, come to your own conclusion. But the reality is, right now, there are people out there that their lives are driven by whether someone's wearing a mask or not. I mean, we see or hear on social media all of these people that just freak out. I thought this was a mask needed to be worn. I thought this, I thought that, and so forth. And so my stance has been, I have a mask in my truck, and if I go into a place and it says masks are required, I put my mask on. If it says masks are optional, then I look around and I say, okay, are a majority of people in here wearing masks? And it's not that I'm trying to be a conformist, because that's not necessarily the case. But I also don't necessarily want to fuel someone's fear, anxiety, and so forth, just based on something that's very simple for me to do. And so again, that's my stance is that, and I have patients that come in and they're like, I don't care. And then I have other patients that come in and they say, can everyone wear a mask? And we absolutely accommodate whatever their level of comfort is. And we're, taking extra precautions to decontaminate rooms and doing those type of things, which, dealing with all of the chemicals now that we're exposed to is another story for another day. But and may actually end up causing more harm than the virus ever could. But again, right. that data is still formulating. We first have to collect data on how serious the virus was, but based on some of the data that they're talking about, exposure to antibiotic this and protective that and so forth. I mean, in medicine, they've actually gone back to saying, good old soap and water is just about as good as anything. Because if you sterilize and protect everything, your immune system needs opposition. It needs something to go against, or otherwise it starts fighting against yourself. And autoimmune disease is going through the roof. So I did want to address one other thing in regards to the mask, and that's the low oxygen levels. The low oxygen levels, unless someone is already borderline hypoxic, meaning their lungs aren't exchanging oxygen on an appropriate level, then the mask can sometimes, or if they've got a really tight-fitting mask and so forth, then the mask can produce low oxygen levels. But I got to tell you, that's really rare. What most patients end up having is they feel like they can't breathe well in the mask, and so they end up hyperventilating. Which hyperventilation and it's interesting. We looked at some research in emergency medicine at if a patient will breathe one extra time a minute over 30 minutes, they will drop their CO2 level and raise the acid bicarbonate level within their bodies will shift enough to make them show signs of significant hyperventilation. And so if you're wearing these masks 24/7 and you feel like you have to take bigger breath and push things out and you're constantly worried about, am I getting enough air? Am I getting enough air? Your risk of hyperventilation, which then makes you pass out, which then makes you lightheaded, which makes you dizzy, all of the symptoms that they're talking about is much more common and much more prominent than, say, low oxygen levels. The good news is I think the brain damage concept is a little fear-based, and so I would use caution when you hear that. But the hyperventilation and blowing off too much CO2 is very real, and we see that on a frequent basis.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. Really great. That's because I do know that especially too, people work out with, and this is another thing too, Doc. When you're walking and when you're lifting weights, or you're in your your toil gyms, or you're doing your treadmills, people are wearing their mask and they're like, dude, you have to breathe a little bit more. And this is why they're having some problems, like they feel lightheadedness, and it's because they said don't wear a mask when you're working out, because you do need to breathe a little bit more. And so I think they forgot about that, and then they put masks on, and they weren't, their oxygen level wasn't as normal as it normally should be when they're working out, because they weren't used to, and they did feel lightheadedness, and some people did pass out. So
yeah, and that's definitely a valid point. Absolutely.
Yeah, but I mean, it's I think it's about 80 degrees, 90 degrees outside right now where I am. So I'm in my house right now, actually. I'm okay. We've had some winds, but I don't wear my mask when I'm in my house, and I walk around the block. I'm out. I'm not wearing it, and I've been like that since the day one, since this whole thing started, Doc, and I've been fine. But I have to go into a store, then like I had to go into Home Depot yesterday, and I put it on, though my kind of slipped down my on my face, so wasn't quite all the way on. But they didn't even say anything to me, and I think people have really, hopefully, just trying to move on with their lives and and get back to some normalcy. I hate to say that, but it's really important that people get back to some normalcy, physically, mentally, and spiritually, because this has been just such a kind of, an uprooted craziness. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings up a couple of really good points. And this is data from, this isn't from the World Health Organization. It was from another global infectious disease. But they compiled the data that we have now. And early data, again, is always data, which means actually the survivability rate is going up as we get more people tested and we find, and get better testing. Right now, based on the data that they have, if you, as an individual, get exposed to COVID and actually contract the virus, the disease, your survivability rate is 98.6%. And that's only going to go up. So that's cool. If you get exposed to the disease. Research from the American Medical Association, they looked at 5,700, so 5,700 hospitalized patients in New York City, and 97% of the patients that were hospitalized had out-of-control hypertension, diabetes, and now I say and/or, meaning many of them had all three, morbid obesity. So those are, and again, out of control. Those are your primary risk factors for this. And that doesn't mean all diabetics have issues or all hypertensive patients have issues. These are patients that they were the sick of the sick. And if you look at New York's medical system, the unfortunate reality is they run pretty close to capacity as it is just on a normal day-to-day basis. So something comes through and really pushes their limits a little bit, such as this, and they're in panic mode. And then the other data that was interesting, this is out of BBC, so from Britain, and they actually produced an article that said, how worried should you be? And they looked at all of the data, and they projected a, because one of the other things that they projected is life is shortened by 10 years by getting sick with COVID. And anyway, they did, plot lines and all of these other things and looked at a lot of data and actually showed that was not the case. They said that if your body's healthy, strong, and otherwise, viable, then the reality is your body will do amazing, and your life expectancy has not changed. So, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer. Don't get me wrong. The virus is real.
Sure.
And if someone has a lot of concerns, or if they're in the risk factor portion, they need to be careful. And the rest of us need to be sensitive to them being careful, and whatever we need to do to help with that, great. But the reality is, if we're going to get to herd immunity and do it with any kind of rapidity, meaning, before 25 years, like my mathematician friends sorted out, then we're going to have to be wise about getting people exposed. The vaccine, it may miss, and it may be a year and a half out, and by then we're already through phase 2 and phase 3 of the virus. So I just think we need to follow the same pattern we've done with other infections.
Absolutely, I agree. This is great. Oh my God, there's so much. It's so cool to have you on, man, because we just sit there and listen as you talk, but it's also the information that you're giving out that, it's very calming and smoothing, and so the people, our listening audience, can take this information and put it to good common sense and into their daily lives and make a big difference and move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and thank you. No, thank you. That's kind to say. I think the other point to point out, I mean, even if you're in the vaccine camp, which, anyway, regardless, that's another conversation also for another day. They're still relying upon your immune system to form antibodies to this. So the greatest thing that you can do is protect and prepare your immune system. So when it comes in contact with the virus proteins, whether you get that from exposure, which, who knows when that'll happen, or from exposure, meaning from other people, or the vaccine, who knows when that will happen, that your immune system is prepared. Best thing you can do. Really, the only thing you can do.
Wow, no, we really appreciate that. Nick Pearson was going to come on. He may have a question for you or not, but I think he just wants to come on, as I'm calling him up. But and also cousin Bob. But this is so comforting, because a lot of people, mask, no mask, social distancing, whatever. But they're so worried, and this is like common sense. But we're still taking precautions, but it's common sense. But we can't be living in fear when the elements are such as you have presented them. So that's terrific.
Yeah,
let's see if I got
the fear is going to be a bigger issue. Some of my counselor friends are just screaming with how busy they are. And we're not going to see the full effects of that until really 6 months after. That's when it really hits full force.
Now, why do you say that it's going to hit full force in 6 months?
So one of the psychologists one of the psychologists that I really like to follow is he says what he does is he listens to songs and watches the news, not so he can listen to the songs per se. He listens to the message, either from the news or otherwise, because he knows in anywhere from 4 to 8 months, depending upon the person, they're going to have if they're not really grounded, they're going to have some type of emotional, spiritual, psychological crisis centered on those things. He said that's how he prepares his staff, office, and therapies months in advance. So when it shows up 6 months later, he's ready to go.
So you're talking about an event or a song, or an event?
He's using songs and news, and that's what he does. He says he watches the news and listens to the songs, and he said most people have good coping mechanisms that they can get by for about 4 to 6 months, but then 4 to 8 months, and so around 6 is the average. He said they'll cope with things the best they can, But then at that, between 4 to 8 months, he said their mechanisms break down, and that's when he starts realizing that, he's going to have to deal with crisis X or news X or fear-driven X. He said that's when he really sees a big bump in his workload based on what happened roughly 6 months ago. So we're still a little bit out. He's starting, but most counselors and psychologists and psychiatrists are absolutely slammed right now, and it's still going to build and get worse. Fear is a very real producer of illness, be that psychological, emotional, or physical. It drives illness.
Okay, at the beginning of this lecture, I asked you, are you ready? Are you ready? And we're going to close with that same question. Are you ready? If you are, let's go.